What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics, and today we got a reaction to girls groups of the 1960s. We'll call it a top 10. There's more than that in there, but we got to have a title for it, right? Brought to us by a friend, longtime supporter and patron of the channel, AnCat Dub. Thank you, AnCat Dub. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons who make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out that Patreon link below or the patron link on the end screen. We could not make it without the patrons. All right, AnCat Dub knows a ton about music. This write-up is absolutely fantastic. It's fantastic. So I'm just going to get into it because AnCat knows way more about this than I do. It's going to be educational, but it's going to be fun, right? These songs are always fun. AnCat says, the era of the girl groups, which essentially covered the first half of the 1960s, had a powerful influence on music, vocal techniques, as well as production and arrangement techniques in all of popular music. The early rock and roll, Buddy Holly, Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, and Little Richard mixed R&B, blues guitar licks, and country song styles with an up-tempo big beat. It was much appreciated by American youth, but the song often alluded to adult themes that teens didn't necessarily grasp or even care about yet. They just liked the energy of the music. On the other hand, the songs written for the girls groups were specifically about teenagers and their adolescent concerns and were often sung by teenagers. This was likely the first popular music intended primarily for the teen. An extensive range of artists have drawn upon the girl group recordings for inspiration and composition ideas, from the Beatles and the Rolling Stones to Frank Zappa, who often use these musical references satirically. What a surprise with Frank, right? To the Ramones, the New York Dolls, and the Runaways. R&B acts like LaBelle, The Emotions, In Vogue, and Destiny's Child with Beyonce were direct descendants of the early girl groups. British retro pop artists like the Pipettes, Swing Out Sister, and Amy Winehouse intentionally revamped the girls' playbook. Even Billy Joel and Bruce Springsteen and his E Street Band owe a considerable debt to the early girl group compositions and have admitted as such. To me, what makes the music of the 1960s girls groups special is a combination of sonic intensity with a weird kind of innocence and purity in the performances that we don't often hear in today's popular music. This playlist of 1960s girls groups features various iconic acts appearing on the smaller independent record labels such as Phil Spector's Phillies Records. There won't be any Motown groups included, as that is a whole other can of worms to deal with. I'm focusing on 7 representative acts and moving chronologically through the recording release dates. The playlist will run over the usual number, but most of the songs are only 2.5 to 3 minutes in length. Listening to girl group recordings can be like eating popcorn at the movie theater. You can't just eat one. Fair warning, and this is true on a lot of older recordings, the audio quality of these recordings is often not very good, particularly on the Phil Spector tracks, because few of these recordings were ever remastered properly to modern standards. Now, AnCat's going to educate us some more here. 3 things to know about the early 1960s pop music scene. Number 1, this was the era when record producers, record labels, and music publishing houses strictly controlled the fortunes of music artists, and that continued into the 70s and into today, but really did here. Producers, of course, had their favorite artists to use and abuse, but music publishing houses also had artists that they relied upon to create official demos of songs that their songwriting staffs were mass producing. It was another opportunity for aspiring performers to make some money and get noticed by the right people in the music business. An example of this would be Carole King and Jerry Goffin having their babysitter, Eva Boyd, an aspiring singer, record the demo of a song called The Locomotion, which Goffin and King intended to be recorded as a single by Dee Dee Sharp. But Sharp ended up turning down the song, and they were impressed enough with Boyd's demo version that they went ahead and released it as a single themselves. The Locomotion went to all the way to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the U.S., and the career of Little Eva, as she's now was billed, began, and Goffin and King lost a babysitter. Note that Eva Boyd was introduced to Goffin and King by a vocal group known as the Cookies, who also recorded for the songwriters. More about the Cookies later in the playlist. Number 2, it was also a time when professional songwriters produced most of the material and only a handful of performers composed on an equal level with these songwriting teams. All but one of the songs we'll hear today were composed by professional songwriters, not the singers or backing musicians. Although people tended to think of professional songwriting teams as being staffed by mainstream, middle-aged men in gray suits, plenty of the songwriters of the era were not much older than the performers of their songs. Carole King composed Will You Love Me Tomorrow for the Shirelles when she was just 20 years old. 2 other prolific pop songwriters, Ellie Greenwich and Cynthia Weil, were only 2 years older than King. More on these folks later. And number 3, finally, another thing to know is this was the singles era. It was all about creating 2-sided vinyl records that allowed for only 1 song on each side. The A side featured the track intended for radio play. The B side was often just filler. Occasionally it was the B side that caught on with radio disc jockeys, as they were then known. I once wanted to be one. but that wasn't typical. Albums tended to be an afterthought and were only intended for the die-hard fans of an artist. Recording an album with songs obviously involved a lot more concentrated work and expense, and since pop radio didn't play album sides then, the singles were all that the music biz really cared about. Some of the girl groups only recorded 1 or 2 albums during the span of their entire careers, an approach that would be unheard of today. Note that the Spotify list that I, Sean, am linking includes many bonus tracks for anyone hearing more. So there's a Spotify list below, and I'll remind you at the end that has all of these songs in the order that I'm playing them, but also has a bunch of bonus songs. So if you haven't ever watched one of our videos before, the music will not be in the video, but it'll be a Vimeo link below. Click on that and follow along with us. Let's jump into it. And I just want to remind you again, this is merely a chronological presentation of these songs, right? They're not ranked in any sort of order. Kick it off with Tonight's the Night by the Shirelles, released all the way back in 1960. Songwriters Luther Dixon and Shirley Owens. ANCAT says most people feel that the first defining girl group of the era was the Shirelles, 4 high school friends from Passaic, New Jersey. Essentially an R&B act to begin with the addition of big beat with lush arrangements helped the group to carve a niche in the rock and pop markets and inspire, among other acts, the Beatles to hone a similar vocal harmony. Along with Sam Cooke, the Shirelles were one of the earliest crossover acts of the 1960s. All right, I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Thanks again, ANCAT Dub. Tonight's the Night, the Shirelles. Wonderful, right? Backing vocals there and just the harmonies. You know, the song itself, this guy wants to be with this girl and she's thinking about it and she goes ahead at the end and decides to take a chance. But definitely sounds like 1960s. Just fantastic, man. Fantastic vocal performance. If you like that, I imagine you're going to like the next song. A lot of these songs I know, some of these songs I've never heard that song, but we're going to continue on with the Shirelles. Will You Love Me Tomorrow from the same year, 1960. ANCAT Dub says it was written by the husband and wife team of Jerry Coffin and Carole King. It was their first composition to reach #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, and it made the Shirelles the first African-American all-girl group to reach #1 in the U.S. Note that R&B and soul singer-songwriter-producer Luther Dixon was the producer of both of these singles. The song has been covered from everyone from the Four Seasons to Linda Ronstadt, Roberta Flack, Dave Mason, Dionne Warwick, and Amy Winehouse. Definitely know that song. I thought the arrangement was kicked up a little bit more on that one. Sounds fantastic. The harmonies, the vocal performance. I realize the quality is not way up there, but I think the quality in both these songs sounds okay, especially from 1960, just the recording quality on it. The song itself, I mean, I know this song, but I never really thought about the lyrics till you read them, right? And it's about a one-night stand, so some of these are definitely a little bit more adult in nature. We're gonna be together tonight, and maybe the one-night stand you can find where that goes, but you're still gonna love me tomorrow. You say you love me today, but are you gonna love me tomorrow? So good song, good offerings from the Shirelles. We're gonna move on to He's a Rebel by the Blossoms, released in 1962. So the Shirelles songs were 1960, both of them. Now we're going to 62. Songwriter Gene Pitney. There's a good story behind this ANCAT Dub shares. Everyone listening to popular radio in the 1960s knew that the Crystals had a Billboard #1 hit with He's a Rebel, except that the Crystals didn't actually record the song. The New York-based Crystals were touring on the East Coast with, I believe, singer-songwriter Gene Pitney, who just happened to have written a song titled He's a Rebel, specifically intended for the Shirelles, but they turned him down. Everything's connected. The Crystals' producer, Phil Spector, was interested in using this song as a follow-up single to a recent Crystals hit, but Spector learned that the singer Vicky Carr was soon to record that same song as her debut. Because remember, back then, man, it was a race to record these. Everybody recorded everybody else's song, so the Los Angeles-based Spector did the expedient thing and went ahead and recorded He's a Rebel with Darlene Love and the Blossoms. He paid the Blossoms a session fee and credited the track to the Crystals. Of course, there needed to be a follow-up single for this hit, so Spector recorded He's Sure the Boy I Love with Darlene Love and the Blossoms, again uncredited. The single went to #11. The Crystals were now a hot commodity and understandably furious with Phil Spector over his scheming and manipulations. But the producer was king in those days, and for Spector, hits were as much about timing as they were about getting the right sound. In 1963, the Crystals, with Dolores Brooks singing lead, then recorded Da Do Ron Ron, a top 10 hit in both the US and the UK. Except, of course, it wasn't that simple. Originally, Spector had Darlene Love singing lead on Da Do Ron Ron. I mean, I know that song really well. It's just weird to say, right? Until that lead voice track was replaced with a version sung by Brooks, while all 3 Blossoms, including Darlene Love, sang backup. So even that hit didn't have all the Crystals participating on it. One other oddity regarding the He's a Rebel single, since the Crystals now had a #1 hit with He's a Rebel, Gene Pitney ended up having to teach them the song so they could perform it live for the remainder of the tour. Of course, people are clamoring for it, right? Or so the story goes. It's worth mentioning that the number 2 single behind He's a Rebel was Only Love Can Break a Heart by none other than Gene Pitney. Like all of Phil Spector's productions, this song was recorded live in the studio, instruments and vocals together, and captured on a 3-track recorder. They were mono, not stereo recordings. Note that Phil Spector created his records with the best studio musicians in Los Angeles, a loose collective we now know as the Wrecking Crew. Although it's been argued that it didn't matter much who was playing, since Spector liked to mass his instrumentation and have as many as 4 or even 5 types of keyboards playing the same notes at the same time. 4 or more horns and strings, 3 or 4 guitars, multiple basses, all doing the same, also known as the wall of sound, essentially playing on top of one another rather than separated into distinct voices. It was a recipe for cacophony. So Spector kept the arrangement simple and rehearsed the musicians to death. He basically broke every accepted rule of how to arrange and produce a recording, creating a very dense and compressed overall sound for his records. What a fantastic story, and just shows you how so much manipulation back then. He's a Rebel, The Blossoms, but as you see on Spotify, it's The Crystals coming. That's what it was officially credited as, so that's what you're going to find it on. It's really The Blossoms. You do notice a difference a little bit in quality of recording, but also you notice a big difference in arrangement, or I do, right? Because instead of on the choruses just letting the harmonies of the girls come through, Spector's pumping that arrangement up, right? All the instruments are pumping through that, and so I don't necessarily prefer that on this type of music, but I get it. He had a lot of success with it, but I would have rather heard the girls. I didn't necessarily like the lead vocals as well on this one. They're fine, but once they get into the to the chorus, it's really well done. I mean, the song itself, she's just with a rebel guy, and if you don't like it, you're not going to like her. That's pretty much that simple. The lyrics on these are not always going to be out there. They're fine. They're not going to be high level complicated, because it's not the idea. These things kind of put a smile on your face. I don't know how they couldn't write this type of music. Next up, we got a stone cold classic. We got He's So Fine by the Chiffons, released in 1963, so we're going another year ahead. Songwriter Ronnie Mack. The Chiffons were like many of the girl groups originally from the New York City area, and Cat Dub says, in this case from the Bronx. One of the many girl groups of the era that is the one I probably listened to the most. Wow. And Cat included a Wikipedia quote. The group is originally a trio of schoolmates, lead singer Judy Craig, backed by Patricia Bennett and Barbara Lee, enrolled at James Monroe High School in the Bronx in 1960. In 1962, with the suggestion of songwriter Ronnie Mack, the group added Sylvia Peterson, who had sung with Little Jimmy in the Tops at age 14, sharing lead vocals. The group chose the name The Chiffons while recording and releasing their first single, He's So Fine, written, as we already talked about, by Ronnie Mack, who set himself up as their manager after overhearing them harmonize in their high school's lunchroom. It was produced by the tokens of The Lion Sleeps Tonight fame and released on the Lori Records label. He's So Fine hit number 1 in the U.S., selling over 1 million copies, and was awarded a gold disc. One of the most instantly recognizable golden oldies, with its do, lang, do, lang background vocal. I know how to say it, but it's weird when you're reading them, right? I could sing them to you, but I'm not. He's So Fine is also renowned as a plaintiff song in the famous plagiarism case against George Harrison's My Sweet Lord. If you want to know all about that, we've got a two-part review up of that Harrison album. Just go search George Harrison, and I tell that story at length in that review. Another one of those songs that you want to keep going on, right? It's under 2 minutes long. So far, my favorite song. I think they sound so fantastic, and that do lang, it's such a, it sticks in the head, right? It's a trick. It's a studio trick, and there's all kinds of studio tricks that make songs stick in your head. There's all kinds of manipulation that's done even with beats and rhythms, and where beats come in during choruses and on certain words, and all that stuff. And it's been perfected now. That's why so much music sounds the same the last 15 years, because, popular music, because they've really refined that and mastered it. But just a fantastic song. The vocal quality is really quite good on this. And if you like that, we're keeping right here on the Chiffons train with One Fine Day, released in 1963, songwriters Jerry Goffin and Carole King. It first became a popular hit in the summer of 1963, reached the top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. In 1980, Carole King covered it herself and charted at number 12 with her version, becoming her last top 40 hit. It's subsequently been covered by numerous artists over the years. In this song, the rock and piano intro is played by Carole King. All right, One Fine Day, which I knew that song too. It's interesting listening to these back to back and then having the lyrics up and you realize they use the same technique on this song. I know a lot of these girls groups use these, but that layering of the lead singer and then the backing vocalist, kind of the layering on top of each other and ending every line shooby dooby dooby doo wop wop. It really sticks in your head. And this song, the story is, you can almost put it with "He's So Fine," but she wants this guy. And she'll be waiting for him because it's meant to be. He kind of likes to get around, but she'll be waiting for him when he's ready to settle down. But once again, I think the vocal quality on both of these with the Chiffons. Now, I'm not talking about the production quality of how the song sounds because it's old. I'm talking about the vocal quality is a step up from what we've heard before, right, on these two Chiffon songs. Next up, we have Then He Kissed Me by the Crystals, also in 1963. Songwriters Phil Spector, Ellie Greenwich, and Jeff Barry. Wikipedia quote, number 6 in the US, 2 in the UK. The lyrics are a narrative of a young woman's encounter, romance, and eventual engagement with a young man. In 2004, it's number 493 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time. Pitchfork placed it at 18 on the list of the 200 Greatest Songs of the 60s. Billboard named it 8 on their list of the 100 Greatest Girl Group Songs of All Time. High praise. I mean, I know this song as well. The Crystals, Then He Kissed Me. That song is great, man. You do, I mean, ANCAP pointed out, I'd never thought about, like, some of these songs, like with the Spector, you do notice a little dip in production quality in the quality of what this thing sounds like. Not like Spector was a master producer. Horrible human being, master producer. Great song. Plays out the story, but I thought the arrangement on this one was really nice. I wasn't as happy with it on He's a Rebel, but this is actually the Crystal. So as we bring that story all the way around, this is actually the Crystal. So really well done. Next up, we have Please Don't Wake Me by the Cinderellas, aka the Cookies, the Stepping Stones, the Honeybees, and the Palisades. Released in 1964, songwriters Cynthia Weil and Russ Titelman. The Cinderellas were more commonly known as the Cookies, and they recorded at least 4 quintessential girls groups numbers. Don't Say Nothing Bad About My Baby, Chains, Please Don't Wake Me, and I Never Dreamed. We'll listen to the last 2 numbers as they are less heard, but are both gorgeous tracks. Arguably, there are 2 versions of the same song, at least in terms of the lyrics, but the production achieves an essential element of the 1960 girls group's aesthetic. Dense, colossal sound, or as girl group fan Bruce Springsteen put it, quote, apocalyptic grandeur, end quote. Although Phil Spector tends to get all the credit for this sonic approach, other producers quickly followed suit. It was Spector who had the idea to pair tender adolescent ballads with deadly serious, bombastic arrangements to drive home the point that what was happening to the teenager in this song was the most important thing on earth. It was essential that these recordings sound big, dramatic, even colossal to the young listener. It's basically the same effect that Led Zeppelin so successfully exploited a number of years later. Phil Spector himself referred to this production style as little symphonies for the kids. Please Don't Wake Me was produced by Russ Titelman and Barry Mann, the husbands in 2 successful husband and wife songwriting teams. Wikipedia, a little bit about the Cookies, says, formed in 1954 in Brooklyn. By 1961, the Cookies consisted of Dorothy Jones and newcomers Earl Jean McCrae and one of Dorothy's cousins, Margaret Ross. Jones also recorded 1 solo recording for Columbia in 1961. This trio had the greatest success as the Cookies under their own name as backing vocals for other artists, including Neil Sedaka's hit songs Breaking Up Is Hard to Do, The Dreamer, and Bad Girl, and recording demos for Alden Music under the direction of Carole King and Jerry Goffin. They provided the backup vocals for the Little Eva song that we talked about earlier, hit song The Locomotion, as well as their follow-up hit, Let's Turkey Trot, both from 1962, and for Mel Torme's hit version of Coming Home Baby. They scored their biggest hit in 1963 with the song Don't Say Nothing Bad, in parentheses, About My Baby, which reached number 3 on the Billboard R&B chart and 7 on the Billboard Pop chart. A 1962 hit, Chains, was of course recorded by the Beatles for the debut, Please Please Me. I believe the lead singer, ANCAT Dub says, on this track and the next was Margaret Ross, but the history of the Cookies is incredibly confusing and almost impossible to verify. You see, kind of as we're getting through this list, all kinds of weird stuff goes on because you don't really know what's going on as these poor girls are being manipulated by production, by the producers, by the record companies, by everybody else, everybody who had a stake in the success. But also you see how it kind of all interweaves together. They come across each other in all these different ways. It kind of connects. So that's pretty cool. Please Don't Wake Me, the Cinderellas, aka the Cookies. I like on Spotify down below, you see how they just list out all the names they went by. But really well done. Really pleasant sound. She loves the guy. She doesn't want it to be a dream. They finally get together. And so don't wake me if it is a dream. But Really well done. Production, once again, you can tell in the Spectre inspired stuff, there's much more arrangement, and not quite as much focus on the girls' harmonies and stuff themselves. I mean, they're still there and they're still fantastic, but that is a little bit of difference on some of these. Now, they're going to be billed simply as the Cookies. I Never Dreamed, released in 1964. Songwriters Jerry Goffin and Russ Titelman, arranged by Carole King. ANCAT Dub says was their single that unfortunately went unnoticed, which is really a crime because it's truly a gorgeous and powerful track. It was meant to sound huge in the Phil Spector style, and it succeeds admirably. Note that I Never Dreamed was both written and produced by the husbands and two of the most prolific songwriting teams of the era, Cynthia Will and Russ Titelman, and Jerry Goffin and Carole King. Carole King created the song's arrangement. Both teams worked for Alden Music, founded by Don Kirshner and Al Nevins in 1958 in New York City, and they literally worked in cubicles a few feet from one another. Needless to say, it was a noisy work environment and the competition was fierce. Margaret Ross, as we mentioned in the last one, is said to be singing lead on this track. I Never Dreamed. I really liked that one. I thought they sounded fantastic on that one. A Spectre type of sound, right, as ANCAT Dub said, admirably, but not over the top. And I thought the recording quality was fantastic, but the vocals were really, really good. It is a shame this song did not hit big because it should have. It should have, man. It should be popping up in movies still, as a lot of these other ones do, but really well done. I mean, the songwriting, there's not much to the songwriting themselves, right? A lot of this stuff's formulaic, right? It's just, the girl wants the guy, and I never dreamed I could have you, and could I have you? And now we're together. Like that's 60s songwriting and late 50s songwriting, until we get to about 65-ish and things start to change. But not talking about, Guthrie or Dylan, but I'm saying mainstream, mass-produced. This is what you're getting. Next up, we've got to 'em. Walking in the Rain by the Ronettes, released in 1964. Songwriters Cynthia Will, Barry Mann, and Phil Spector. The Ronettes are often the first group people think of when they hear the label 1960s girl group. Sean has already reacted to the Ronettes' Be My Baby, a track which only Ronnie Bennett actually appears on, so we're going to listen to a couple of my other favorites. Most people now know Ronnie as Ronnie Spector because in 1968 she made the ill-fated decision to marry her producer. And Cat Deb says, I'll let Sean look into the history of the Ronettes. I'm not going to spare you from all that. It's good, man. But I want to quote from music journalist Tom Moon and the impact of Ronnie Bennett Spector on popular music. Quote, when Ronnie Spector entered the recording studio, she was just another element of a production machine. Nearly all the consequential artistic decisions were made for her. The one thing Spector had total control over was her vocal performance. She might have been marketed as pop, but her approach as a singer, as presence, as attitude, was rock and roll all day long. Through sheer will and the resolute steel in her voice, she satisfied the demands of the production while simultaneously subverting its straitjacketing formula. At a time when very few women, especially those of color, were communicating in this way, her vocal performances opened up the pathway to autonomy that countless female artists would seize and further a short time later. End quote. It's great. The Walking in the Rain single reached 23 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in 1964, made it all the way to number 3 on the R&B chart in 65. It's been ranked as high as 266 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Songs of All Time, but it's currently not part of the listing because there's been 3 iterations of that. I personally love the atmosphere of this recording and its very measured pacing. It simmers rather than boils over with enthusiasm, making the production feel a bit more adult than some of the other girl group offerings. Walking in the Rain all the way to the Thunder Effects. It's actually a well-written song as well. Not that the other ones aren't, but it is a little more mature. And I definitely see what ANCAT Dub says. We're not going kind of all in on the arrangement, on the harmonies, on the pacing. Obviously, Ronnie sounds fantastic, right? But the story is she's trying to meet the man of her dreams, but she has not met him yet. She's saying what she wants, and her friends suggest a couple people. No, it's not him. She hasn't met him, but she'll know him when she sees him. But it kind of shows you, just it gives you a glimpse into the tour de force that Ronnie was. And if you want more of a glimpse into that, we're up next as well with Do I Love You, released in 64. Songwriters Phil Spector, Pete Andrioli, and Vinnie Poncia. And Cat Deb says, although this song is not often mentioned when talking about the Ronettes, it is everything a great girl group recording requires, and it had a profound effect on a certain songwriter by the name of Brian Wilson. The instrumental sections on Do I Love You, particularly the bass and saxophone arrangement, will no doubt remind you of something you've heard before on the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds album. Of course, there's a review of that album. Do I Love You? I didn't like it as much as Walking in the Rain. It's still a really good song. Shows you Ronnie's just tremendous ability again to also be understated and not have to go over the top, but just sound really, really good. I thought the arrangement was a little more bombastic on this one, right? But it was good. It was good. And I mean, the songwriting, once again, I mean, I just tell you guys real quick, because I always tell you what the song's about. I mean, it's just about her scheming to get this guy, right? She's trying to get this guy. All right, let's move on to the Shangri-Las, Train from Kansas City, released in 1965. Songwriters Lee Greenwich and Jeff Barry. Wikipedia says the group was formed at Andrew Jackson High School in Cambria Heights, a neighborhood in Queens, in 1963. The group consisted of two pairs of sisters, Mary Weiss, lead singer, and Elizabeth Betty Weiss, and identical twins Margie Ganser and Mary Ann Ganser. Initially, the girls performed without a name for their group. However, when they signed their first deal, they began to call themselves the Shangri-Las after a restaurant in Queens. They performed with the Beatles, a fall 1964 tour with the Rolling Stones, R&B artists such as the Drifters and James Brown. According to Mary Weiss, was surprised to discover the girls were white, and Cashbox magazine listed them as best new R&B group. If you don't know Cashbox, there's the charts now in the U.S. are Billboard and have been for a long time, but for a long, long time they were Billboard and Cashbox, and so you'll see them on older songs reported. Went to this on Cashbox and went to this on Billboard. Just a little aside there. And Kat says, known as the bad girls of pop, the Shangri-Las cultivated a leather-clad, blue-collar, tough girl persona that set them apart from the most demure girl-next-door attitudes of many of the other girl groups. Train from Kansas City is my personal favorite Shangri-La track, and it isn't known by as many people as the number one hit, of course, Leader of the Pack. But I find Leader of the Pack to be cartoonish and quite dated in its approach, so we're going with a couple of other worthy tracks instead. The production arrangement on Train from Kansas City comes courtesy of George Shadow Morton, what a great nickname, who was fond of special effects sounds, such as the revving motorcycle and breaking glass noises on Leader of the Pack. Shadow Morton achieves a pretty good train ambiance on this number, which helps to propel the angst-ridden lyrics forward. Note that lead singer Mary Weiss was only 16 when both of my playlist songs were released, so this one and the next one. The Train from Kansas City, I think the best written track so far on here, just telling this story. It's a fantastic story. I thought they sounded really good. Really good. Harmonies are fantastic. The arrangement worked. The train stuff and the sound effects didn't sound cartoonish to me on this. Like, I thought it worked. It worked. The story is pretty good. She's engaged to this guy, but her ex, who I guess doesn't know he's her ex yet, writes her this letter, and he's coming in from the train from Kansas City. So she's going to go down and meet him and tell him that it's over. She couldn't answer the letter. Didn't want to tell him that. But wants to tell him in person. So she's reassuring her current fiance that it's going to be okay. I'm going to go meet him on the train from Kansas City, but it's going to be okay. So, I mean, well written song. This whole song was just really good. And as alluded to in the previous track, we're going to continue on with the Shangri-Las, Out in the Street, released in 1965. Songwriters Ellie Greenwich and Jeff Barry, which NCAT Dub says they too were New York based and worked with a wide range of artists and producers, including Phil Spector. Out in the Street makes for an interesting flip side to the better known Leader of the Pack song. The tough guy's hung up his leather jacket and ended his mean street ways for the sake of his girl. But she feels nothing but remorse for his decision because, quote, he's not the same. Something about his kissing. That tells me he's changed. I know that something's missing inside. As a point of comparison, some of the biggest singles of 1965 were Help and Yesterday by the Beatles, I Can't Get No Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones, Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds, What the World Needs Now Is Love by Jackie DeShannon, and Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan. A good songwriter on this talks about the story that, I touched on in the beginning, but it's kind of a different story. Usually in a lot of these stories, the girl's trying to change the guy and you won't do it. This one, the guy actually did do it and she realized he's not the same, so she's got to set him free back to go hang out with his, quote, gang. The arrangement for me, parts of it I really liked and parts of it I wasn't quite sold on, so it kind of made the song, I didn't like it as well as The Train from Kansas City, but still a really good song. All right, we got two songs left. We got That's When the Tears Start from the Blossoms, released in 1965. Songwriter Van McCoy. Not many of these songs are written by one person, if you notice. Quote, the Blossoms were probably the most successful unknown group of the 60s. They made a career of singing backup for scores of artists from Paul Anka to Elvis Presley and Tom Jones, with the versatility that allowed them to be a choral group 1 minute and a surf sound doo-wop group for Jan and Dean's hits the next minute. Wikipedia says the Blossoms were an American girl group that originated from Los Angeles. During their height of success in the 60s, the group's lineup most famously consisted of Darlene Love, Vanita James, and Jean King. Later, Darlene's younger sister, Edna Wright, would also sing leads for the Blossoms. Although the group had a recording career in their own right, they were most famous for being the group to actually record the #1 hit, He's a Rebel, which producer Phil Spector credited to the Crystals, and for providing backing vocals for many of the biggest hits of the 1960s, such as the Righteous Brothers' You've Lost That Loving Feeling, which was #1 hit in 1964 in the US and the UK, as well as Monster Mash by Boris Pickett and Johnny Angel, both of which went to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Ranked among Rolling Stone's 100 greatest singers, Darlene Love was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2011. And Cat Dub says, "That's When the Tears Start" is a particularly well-produced track and retains its big sound and energy to this day. Darlene Love and the Blossoms finally got to record as the Blossoms and got some much-deserved credit. Another song you felt like could have just went on for longer. Really, really well done. This one's on the other side of most of these other songs. This is Heartbreak. They were together. She pretends like she's okay, but she's not. She holds her head high when he walks by, but she's not okay. She says she's all right during the day when she's working, but at night it really hits her, which is true of any sort of difficult things that we go through. So it's good songwriting, really good production. It definitely holds up, and Darlene sounds fantastic. All right, we got one song left now. I'm just going to remind you one more time. These are not ranked. These are chronologically in order, right? So we started in 1960, and we're going to finish all the way up in 1968, Just for Tonight by the Chiffons. Songwriters Larry Cusick, Richie Adams, and Wes Farrell. By 1968, the Crystals, the Cookies, the Ronettes, and the Shangri-Las had all broken up for one sad reason or another. The Shirelles' last charting single was released in 1967, and their constant lineup changes effectively rendered them unrecognizable. The Chiffons' final chart hit was Sweet Talking Guy, released in 1966, making it all the way to the top 10, or all the way to 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. But their fortunes would change over the next 2 years. The Chiffons did their first overseas tour of England and Germany in June 1967. On one of their London club dates, the Chiffons were one of the opening acts for Jimi Hendrix. Members of the Beatles and Stones were in the audience. All right, let's finish this fantastic list off. Just for Tonight, the Chiffons, a song that was really well produced and really sticks in your head because she sings and in the harmonies. It's call and response with the Just for Tonight. So by the end of the song, you were singing, she's basically just telling this guy, be with me tonight, and we'll let everything else take care of itself. Well done. Sounded good. I mean, I don't have a lot else to add on that one, but a nice way to finish this list off. And now we got to get to my favorite tracks. And Cat Dub made a great point at the start. You know, listen to good girl group songs. You know, it's like movie theater popcorn. Can't have just one. And I really found that to be true on this. Just a well put together list. I liked them all. My faves, Will You Love Me Tomorrow, the Shirelles, He's So Fine, and One Fine Day by the Chiffons, Then He Kissed Me by the Crystals, I Never Dreamed by the Cookies, Walking in the Rain by the Ronettes, Train from Kansas City by the Shangri-Las, and That's When the Tears Start by the Blossoms. Look, you could argue any of these should be favorites, right? But not only a great list, but a great history lesson by Cat Dub. Always learn something from Cat Dub's lists. So appreciate all the work that Cat put into this one. Thank you for watching. Let me know what other songs I should check out. Remember, we excluded Motown stuff, but there's still plenty, obviously, of great stuff out there. Let me know your favorites from this list. And until next time, guys, I will see you.